Let's start with one of the most important quotes regarding the very existence of humans. Charles Darwin's findings from the evolution theory. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. My name is Irfan Pottachola, and I'm going to talk about such a change today. A daring change, but as Darwin suggests, inevitable if the concern must survive. Digital transformation of the construction industry. But we all know that digital innovations are extremely necessary in modern day construction. And as most of you, I also realized that in the hard way. A few years ago, I was working as a project engineer in a large construction project. But working in such projects with 2D paper drawings and verbal communications was a nightmare. Witnessing and sometimes refereeing blame games and overseeing wastage of resources were a routine of my life. At that point, I started to wonder that when the manufacturing industry are producing autonomous supercars and when the space industry are landing rockets after boosting them to outer space, why are we in construction still working as if we are in the 90s? Now that question changed my life. I moved to the Netherlands from India to pursue my master's, and I learned about the promising potential of digital innovations in the construction industry. However, the implementation of these innovations is still very low. Why? This was the guiding question for my research. Well, perhaps you can relate to this. Does you or your organization have high ambitions regarding development and implementation of different digital innovations in your processes? But is the adoption of those innovations by your employees not at the desired level despite your multiple attempts? Well, if you do, we find ourselves in what I call the gray area of technology diffusion in construction. Here, firms attempting to implement digital innovations, they face barriers and challenges from different dimensions, some of which are so obscure that the firms fail to understand what the barriers even are. This gray area is what this research focused on. And what is the most important element of this gray area? People and their resistance to change. To navigate this gray area, we need to understand and manage the perceptions of people. Now, how do we do that? Well, we need to first understand the factors which shape these perceptions and attitude of people towards innovations. Following that, we need to know how these factors can be managed and exploited to overcome the roadblocks that we experience in the gray area. And these are exactly the results of my research. Now, I would have loved to walk you through all the results and analysis and findings, but I will mainly touch on some key aspects now, starting with the factors which affect the rate of adoption of digital innovations. We identified 4 key factors which directly affects this rate. Let's take a quick look at them. First, characteristics of the social system. The structure of the social system that your organization is in directly affects the motivation of people to innovate. When we are talking about the construction industry, it is largely project-based, which makes the structure of the construction social system very complex with multiple stakeholders. So to innovate in such a social system, there should be an environment which motivates and supports individuals to take on the related challenges and risks. Now that is where the culture of an organization comes into action. An entrepreneurial and innovative culture provides the room and support for individuals to take initiatives towards innovation diffusions. The next factor is the innovativeness of individuals. Innovativeness is the degree to which an individual adopts new ideas relatively earlier than other members of the social system. Now, based on innovativeness, members can be divided into adopter categories, namely earlier adopters and later adopters. Now, the main difference between them is simple and direct. Earlier adopters seeks out innovation, while later adopters, they need some convincing. Now, these differences means that they have different roles during a diffusion process, and hence they should be managed differently. Earlier adopters, they play the role of gatekeepers of innovation. They bring the idea of the innovation into the organization, and hence it's important to identify them, nurture them, and give them space and support. The later adopters, however, they determine the pace of the diffusion process because they are the majority in the population, and they must be identified and given support and care during the diffusion process. The next factor is the perceived attributes of innovation. These are the attributes which an individual associates with an innovation to shape an opinion and attitude towards them. This in turn influences their adoption decisions. There are 6 attributes of innovation which should be understood, addressed, and explained to the potential adopters during the diffusion process to form a positive attitude towards that innovation. The last factor is the diffusion networks, which are the communication networks that have a strong influence on the adoption decisions of individuals. There are several aspects of diffusion networks that you can exploit to form a favorable perceptions towards the innovation. These aspects are the different communication channels which should be chosen depending on the innovativeness of individuals, creating a good degree of diversity in teams in terms of disciplines and innovativeness, and lastly, finding and using the opinion leaders in your firm. Now, opinion leaders are the individuals that can informally influence others' opinions. So we have to find them, use them in the diffusion processes. Now, the second part of our research and the business end of my research is the innovation diffusion model. Now, this is the final product where it all comes together, and it explains a strategy for innovation diffusion which focuses on exploiting the factors that we just discussed. It does look a bit intimidating, but the core idea is simple, and I will touch on that core idea in short. Now, the diffusion process is to be led by what we call the innovation acceleration groups, which are decentralized groups of enthusiastic individuals, the early adopters, who are given space and support from the top management. They bring knowledge about specific innovation from outside of the organizational boundaries and coordinate its diffusion within the organization. These groups lead the diffusion in specific project where the adoptability of that innovation is transparently scrutinized, and then a decision is made to adopt or reject that innovation in that project. Now, during this step, several things are assessed, but most importantly, the risks associated with the innovation are identified and mitigation strategies for those risks are developed. Also, the changes that are required to implement this innovation in terms of people, process, and technology or more are also addressed. In some cases, following that critical matching process of innovation and project, some things need to be adapted. Now, this could be the innovation itself or the project processes, depending on what's best in that context. The diffusion process then goes through various stages which are focused on shaping the perceptions of individuals using the various factors that we discussed. Now, this increases the adoption rate and awareness of that innovation in that specific project. The new adopters, they then move on to the next project and then continues this cycle. And over time, the innovation gets routinized in that organization. Let's wrap up with some concluding remarks. First, to diffuse innovations, it is important to have an entrepreneurial and innovative culture in firms because individuals need that space and support to initiate innovation diffusions. Second, there should be a well-balanced mix in the project teams in terms of innovativeness. An ideal scenario with respect to this is having earlier adopters in the position of tactical or strategic responsibility of a project team. Third, always be rooted in the project context because every project is different, especially in the construction industry. A successful innovation in one project context could still be perceived as radical and impossible to implement in another. And lastly, do not overlook the informal interpersonal networks in your organization. Use them to create awareness and positive opinions about innovations. To end with, I want to share the most important lesson that I learned during my research. Innovation diffusion is a game of managing perceptions. The what cannot shape the perceptions, neither can the how. The most powerful tool to do that is the why. Chase the why. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to addressing any questions that you might have.